to go through why your bold move isn't necessarily bold enough, or maybe you need to go about redefining what bold means for you. Because what got you here and what got you to the stage is not necessarily what's going to get you there, wherever there is for you. So maybe it's time to rethink this. So sometimes we need to take a moment in time to think back. And if you think back on a bold move you may have taken in the last 12 months, for example, it may be that if you look at it in hindsight, it's actually more of a comfortable stretch. And the reason for that is we repackage familiar fear. So this is when you've taken that bold move, you get that level of anxiety, you get that level of excitement almost, and the adrenaline that comes with it. And that becomes your familiar fear. Because basically, if you want to carry on experiencing that, you actually need to push the boundaries even more. You can't go down that same path. But when we do experience this familiar fear, we repackage it and we call it growth. We change the font, we change the vibe. Underneath, it's exactly the same story. Because what happens is that we go and confuse fear with growth, right? We think that bold has to be scary. So that if it's terrifying, it must be progress. The truth of that is, though, that not every scary move is smart, and not every scary move is actually bold. So when we consider strategic leaps in our business, in our personal lives, for example, they're actually designed, sometimes, more than often, they are designed for us to escape discomfort. So not necessarily to build on alignment. And we land up relying on outdated formulas. These are the formulas of our previous successes or successes of others. They can be borrowed moves from those that have worked, or maybe they were borrowed moves from a previous life. And worst of all, we go and avoid the real question, which is, what am I actually protecting by calling this bold? Is it social status maybe? Or identity? Maybe it's all success stories. We need to have that level of perspective. So, in many ways, we have to consider that in life there are almost three columns. We have a playing it safe column, we have a sounds bold column, and we have an actually bold column, right? And we have to look at statements and really drill down into them and say, what is it about these statements? What is it, where can I actually put them? Am I actually playing it safe? Because it's actually just me putting it in a shinier wrapping, a shinier package, right? Same cake, different box, for example. Or is it actually starting to sound a bit bold because, I am making a move, I'm making a strategic leap, and that's getting in line with where I need to be and with who I need to be. Or am I actually going to take a bold move? Do I actually need to take a bold move? Because I think, we have to be honest with ourselves in thinking that when we are repackaging things, for example, and considering what bold could look like for us, sometimes it's just a new shape of the same pattern. There is an uncomfortable truth in that you cannot break free from a system that you're still emotionally invested in. Now, this doesn't mean that when we are going down a path and we're looking at things that we kind of go, well, I'm no longer going to care about that. No, absolutely. Particularly for solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, or even just, people trying to push themselves in their own careers. The reality is yes, we need to care. Yes, there needs to be that emotional side. Of course there has to be. However, never forget, you have to have the ability to take a step away from it. We need to be able to take a step out of that emotional connection so that we can actually pragmatically overlook the system, right? Because when we tie ourselves emotionally in, we become so emotionally invested in it that we start to pride ourselves on the self-justification of the process, on the being seen as courageous, or I'm always pushing boundaries, rather than actually challenging our own patterns. Because bold moves, and these kinds of bold moves where we are self-justifying, they can actually be seen as deeply safe by anybody who's witnessing us and interacting with us. Because what they're doing is they're actually protecting our own internal assumptions, and other people have very similar internal assumptions. These are the assumptions such as, I need to prove I'm working hard. If I slow down, I'll fall behind. Or maybe you could have heard this one. If I'm busy, I'm being productive. If I'm being productive, I'm being valuable. Busy, productive, and valuable are separate things. The definitions are very separate. They're not necessarily linked. They can be linked, but they're not necessarily linked. Now, these internal assumptions that we almost behold ourselves to, they're our safety valves, and we could look at them as safety valves, because as we pop one off, we'll go to the next one. That one will pop, we'll go to the next one. That one will pop, and we'll recycle, and we'll recycle. The internal assumptions are not actually strategies, even though in many cases we look at them as if they are. And sometimes the bolder that you're trying to look on the outside, it's often the safer you're trying to feel on the inside. And that disconnect, that sort of looking bold and trying to look bold versus the actually, I'm trying to feel as safe as possible on the inside, that disconnect, that is a dissonance. That's an emotional dissonance, because it's what we are doing and what we are feeling are different. And that emotional dissonance is the root of burnout, right? I know that many people will maybe comment on this video and they'll look at this video and they'll say, well, burnout is about a physical response. It's always coming out as a physical response. And I'm here to challenge that, to say, well, yes, there absolutely can be a physical manifestation. I've burnt out 3 times. There were physical manifestations. However, burnout starts with the emotional dissonance, right? Grinding 70 hours a week is going to eventually put you down. But when you're pushing 70 hours a week, it'll start with an emotional dissonance that then compounds itself, and that compounds on itself, and basically we land up with that physical manifestation. Because it's almost like rather that it looks like I'm doing the right thing, but internally I'm feeling like this is just wrong. Being visible doesn't mean you're in alignment with who you are and where you're going. And sometimes actually making the bold move can look dull. Now, I mentioned that, yes, I have burnt out 3 times. And a little story of mine that I like to share with many people is that I remember trying to get onto the C-suite. I remember trying to get onto the board, right? And I played all the micro-political games. I built things, I did things, and I pushed boundaries, right? And I thought, well, the higher the stakes, the better it was. And sure, it was high stakes that I was playing at. But I was playing at that level because I was fear-led. I was being led by my fear in that moment. The fear of not achieving my goal. The fear of not getting to where I want to get to, where I thought I needed to get to. And I thought, well, you know what? The bigger I go, the less chance I'm going home, because they can't ignore me. Absolutely, I'm getting put on that board, right? And the problem with that, of course, was they did ignore me, because in many ways, yeah, I was ticking a box for them. So I ticked the boxes. And off the back of that, I landed up burning out. And in the moment, I didn't know what was really happening. But I then decided to make my next bold move. And I actually jumped into a different sector. And when I jumped into that different sector, I felt it was a new challenge. I felt it was, I could prove this again to myself. And actually what happened was I repeated exactly the same cycle, right? And I just put it in a different wrapper, just a fancier wrapper. And in that process, of course, I ignored all the flags and I carried on going and I carried on taking on more and more and more. And the reality was, again, that resulted in burnout. Except this time it came with a nice side dish of shingles. Because the problem wasn't the move. The problem wasn't that I had gone to something that was completely out of my realm or something I wasn't very familiar with. It was that I was trying to fix misalignment with movement, with my so-called bold performance moves. Because every time I was burning out, and I can say this retrospectively, I was spiraling through that same old bold performance pathway. And what I really needed to do wasn't to move it and was actually to get it back to that alignment piece. I needed to take a moment to pause and understand that maybe there isn't a spoon, if you know what I mean. I know none of us really need to chase more adrenaline. The adrenaline is there. It's absolutely 100% there. What we often lack is that requirement to find alignment with our why, our purpose. Where are we going and what does that really mean? And I like to look at it now and reframe it. And I like to use sort of three questions when I'm thinking about bold moves and I'm thinking about making those big moves, so to speak. And you could consider it a bit of a litmus test. And I'll write it in the comments below. But this is a lens you could look at it through. And you could ask yourself these three questions. Is it bold because it's aligned or because it feels unfamiliar? Does it actually give me long-term clarity or short-term relief? Will the future you thank you for doing it or have to untangle it? We are all human and we'll end up making reactive decisions. It's just part of who we are. And if you're calling a bold move bold because it feels risky, I would challenge you to say that, well, maybe you're confusing chaos for strategy in that moment. Okay, we are biologically programmed to run away from fear. We all know this, right? Because there's power in the herd, there's power in the pack. Thinking back in the day, of course, if you're going to get chased by a saber-toothed tiger, the truth of it is, yes, you're going to want to have 19 of your best buddies around you with spears because at least you got a shot. Okay, versus a one-on-one, you've got a much lower probability of taking on that tiger. So the point of this all is really to go, just because it's feeling risky doesn't necessarily make it bold. Now, you would have heard many people talk about fail fast, learn quick, right? Because that's the way we grow. And I think it's a very important thing to understand that when they're talking about that fail fast, learn quick, they're the micro steps, they're the micro adjustments. And as you take those and as you learn and as you grow, you'll get to that next point where you make your next bold move. And actually what happens is it feels natural. It doesn't necessarily feel like, wow, I'm going to go and jump and just wow. It feels very natural. That doesn't mean you're not going to have the anxiety. It doesn't mean you're not going to have the associated pressures with it. But it's going to feel much more natural because you've learned so much on that path. True boldness in a moment really is about having clarity and restraint, not just movement. Because ultimately, we need to stop playing it safe under the banner of bravery. Now, I've been talking about your bold move, and basically I started this video saying that what got you here today is not necessarily going to get you there, wherever there is for you. And I spoke about just now the micro steps, that fail fast, learn quick. But boldness isn't a volume game. It's not about launching more or changing faster or bigger splashes. It's about making the moves that matter to you as a person, whether that's in your own life, your personal life, or your business life, right? It's pausing long enough to ask yourself the question, is it me? Because what might have got you to where you are today in your life is that, yes, it might have been effort, hustle, urgency, courage, maybe some chaotic detours. I mean, I think we've all had them. But what's going to get you there is intention, alignment, discernment. Not louder, clearer. Because the real bold moves can look like a pause, a no, a week off, a price increase. A decision that perhaps feels scary or terrifying, but actually makes things clearer for you. So we need to try to look at making those moves that don't come from us seeking the adrenaline, but rather come from being in alignment. So why don't you try go and make a quiet decision that's actually as bold as hell?